What if the impenetrable fortress of the Russian military was actually a house of cards, and a single localized spark just set the entire structure ablaze? You have likely heard the rhetoric about a stalemate in Eastern Europe. You might even believe the front lines are frozen, but what I am about to reveal to you shatters that illusion entirely. Welcome to this urgent deep dive where we uncover the hidden truths of global affairs. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky recently made a statement that many brushed off as mere political grandstanding. He claimed that the war, which began in Crimea, will ultimately end there. For months, that sounded like a distant, almost impossible dream. But right now, on the ground, a shocking chain reaction is turning that exact statement into a terrifying reality for Moscow. We have reached a definitive turning point, a violent shift in momentum that is rewriting the strategic map of this conflict. And it is happening not just on the edge of the battlefield, but deep within the supposedly untouchable heart of Russian territory. To understand this massive geopolitical earthquake, we have to start at ground zero. The southern front, specifically the Zaporizhzhia region, this is where the spark was first struck. Over the past 2 weeks, a relentless wave of Ukrainian counterattacks has systematically dismantled what was thought to be an unbreakable wall of Russian defenses. We are not talking about a few meters of gray zone changing hands. We are witnessing the total collapse of fortified defensive lines that took Russian engineering units months to construct. The Ukrainian armed forces have rapidly liberated dozens of villages in the southern corridor. The critical move, the masterstroke that unlocked the entire front, was a violent advance northwest of Verbov. By pushing hard into this sector, the Ukrainians forced a sudden reduction in Russian pressure around Stepov. It was a tactical unlocking of a massive door. After prying that door open, the Ukrainian army surged forward, liberating 8 more key settlements in the direction of Alexandrivka. Right now, heavy clashes are raging for the village of Kalinivka. And this is not just Ukrainian propaganda. This rapid advance has been independently corroborated by the Institute for the Study of War, open source intelligence analysts, satellite imagery, and geolocated combat footage. The Russian Ministry of Defense has remained eerily silent, but the scorched earth and retreating units speak volumes. Zelensky recently mentioned a sudden gain of 300 square kilometers. A massive portion of that reclaimed land sits right here in this southern pocket. Look at the maps. The blue tide of Ukrainian control has swallowed Verbov, Kopani, Novoprokopivka, and is pushing further. Does the sheer speed and size of this territorial grab feel familiar? It should. Think back to the stunning Kursk offensive of 2024, where Ukrainian forces crossed the Russian border and seized nearly 300 square kilometers in just the first week. The Russian high command is now suffering a terrifying sense of déjà vu, but this time the hemorrhage is happening in the vital land bridge connecting mainland Russia to occupied Crimea. So how exactly did Kyiv execute this devastating blow? How did they shatter the illusion of Russian invulnerability in the south? It comes down to a lethal combination of operational capacity, tactical mastery, and the deployment of elite, battle-hardened shock troops. The operation was not a blunt force frontal assault. It was a precise, surgical dissection of Russian vulnerabilities. Ukrainian troops initiated fierce counterattacks and offensive sweeps across the borderlands of the Zaporizhzhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions. They systematically hunted down and eliminated Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups. The gray zones, those bloody no man's lands that have defined this war, are rapidly shrinking. Russian forces have been violently pushed back across this critical dual front. The tip of the spear in this southern offensive was Ukraine's elite airborne forces. The high-risk mission was explicitly designed to crush Russia's ambitions of creeping further into the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions. Under the command of General Ole Apostol, units like the 82nd Bukovina and the 95th Policia Air Assault Brigades were unleashed. These are not ordinary soldiers. These are highly mobile, heavily armed paratroopers trained to exploit gaps in enemy lines with terrifying speed. Their primary objective was clear: the complete annihilation of Russian combat groups and their forceful expulsion beyond the administrative borders. Despite facing intense, desperate resistance and the rapid deployment of significant Russian reserves, these Ukrainian paratroopers maintained a blistering operational tempo. The battlefield became incredibly dynamic. Ukrainian units were not just advancing, They were simultaneously absorbing and shattering Russian counterattacks without losing momentum. The Russian commanders now fully understand the crushing pressure bearing down on them in this critical corridor, stretching from Zaporizhzhia through Kyiv and extending all the way toward the Pokrovsk axis. But the infantry and paratroopers are only part of the nightmare for Moscow. In the shadows of this massive push, specialized units are severing the very arteries of the Russian military. Enter the Spartan Brigade of the National Guard. In a daring operation deep in occupied territory along the logistics routes pointing toward Pokrovsk, they laid a devastating trap. The Russian army, increasingly desperate and forced to rely on bizarre homemade modifications to civilian pickup trucks and all-terrain vehicles, sent a crucial supply convoy down this route. The Spartan Brigade struck with lethal precision. The entire convoy, a rolling block of metal and supplies essential for the Russian southern offensive, was completely obliterated before it ever reached its destination. This ambush was one of the most brilliant tactical victories in the Zaporizhzhia campaign, starving the frontline Russian troops of the ammunition and reinforcements they desperately needed. Yet, these frontline victories are just the visible surface of a much deeper, more catastrophic problem for the Russian military machine. Let's dive deeper into the abyss of Russia's recent losses, because what the SBU Alpha Special Forces just revealed is nothing short of a systemic collapse of Russian military hardware. In just 1 week, the Kremlin didn't just lose 300 square kilometers of ground, they lost the very backbone of their fighting force in the region. We are talking about a staggering hemorrhage of resources, 3 main battle tanks gone, 4 heavily armored infantry vehicles destroyed, 16 artillery systems erased, 4 multiple rocket launchers silenced, 3 critical air defense systems absolutely blinded, and it does not stop there. The Ukrainians wiped out 2 electronic warfare hubs, 231 logistics vehicles, over 200 drones, 17 robotic combat systems, and a combined 8 ammunition and fuel depots. Oh, and add over 2,000 Russian casualties to that butcher's bill. This isn't just standard frontline attrition. This is the calculated, systematic dismantling of a modern army. Now, you might think this localized inferno is contained to the south. You would be dead wrong. The real shocker is how this fire of freedom has leaped across the map, igniting fronts nearly 300 kilometers away. While the Zaporizhzhia front was collapsing under Ukrainian pressure, an equally devastating operation was launched in the northeast along the Kupiansk-Kharkiv line. Up near Vovchansk, Ukrainian forces ripped through Russian defenses to recapture the settlement of Pilna. Using the Seversky Donets River as a natural shield, Ukrainian shock troops executed a brilliant flanking maneuver. They isolated, encircled, and completely wiped out an entire Russian battalion. This wasn't a retreat, it was an annihilation. It perfectly mirrored the tactical dominance we are seeing in the south. If you look at the Kupiansk sector right now, it is an absolute catastrophe for the Russian military. Joint Forces Task Force spokesman Viktor Trehub laid out the grim reality recently. The Russians currently hold less than 3% of the territory they once claimed here. What is left of their forces aren't even acting like an army anymore. They are ghosts, haunting the ruins. Just a few dozen exhausted soldiers hiding in the rubble of destroyed buildings trapped north and east of Kupiansk with their backs against the Oskol River. They aren't preparing for an offensive. They are simply trying to survive the night. That is not a fighting force. That is a trap waiting to spring. Every time Russian commanders attempt to push forward, they are met with a wall of steel. The 116th Independent Mechanized Brigade has been relentlessly hunting down Russian mobility. They are picking off transport vehicles, ATVs, and mortar positions one by one. The Russian army in the north is losing its legs and its fire support, bleeding out from 1,000 tiny cuts. And if you want to see exactly how weak the Russian defensive posture has become, you just have to look at the terrifying precision of Ukraine's drone operators. The Gart Brigade recently pulled off a strike that feels like something out of a science fiction movie. In the South Slobzansky direction, deep inside the Kharkiv Oblast and hidden in a dense village-like forest area, the Russians thought their ammunition depot was safe, but the Ukrainian drones see everything. The operator literally flew a first-person view kamikaze drone straight through a small window of the building housing the explosives. The resulting detonation wiped the depot off the map. This is the new reality for the Russian soldier. Nowhere is safe. The sky itself is hunting them. But we have to look past the tactical fireworks to understand the true endgame here. These operations along the massive Zaporizhzhia-Kharkiv axis are heralding a much broader, much more dangerous strategic shift. Kyiv is setting its sights back on the Donbass. President Zelensky made this crystal clear during his Munich speech. He drew a line in the sand, reminding the world that this war started in the east and in Crimea back in 2014, and Ukraine will never, ever abandon the Donbass. That wasn't just tough talk for a global audience. The Ukrainian armed forces immediately backed up his words with kinetic action. They are systematically blinding the Russian military in the east. Just 1 kilometer outside the occupied city of Donetsk, a highly advanced Russian-made Tor air defense antenna was scanning the skies, desperately trying to block Ukrainian drones. The drones found it first, they hunted the hunter and blew it to pieces. Then, on the night of February 22nd, the Ukrainians unleashed absolute hell on Russian logistics. They obliterated 2 major Russian defensive strongholds near Donetsk and Mariupol, but the crowning achievement of the night was the massive strike on an oil depot deep in Luhansk. This wasn't just any fuel dump. This was the beating heart of Russia's fuel logistics, the primary artery supplying the 41st and 20th Combined Arms Armies in eastern Ukraine. A swarm of FPV drones bypassed Russian air defenses and slammed into the facility. The explosions were apocalyptic. Massive chain reactions tore through the depot, sending a towering column of black smoke into the dawn sky. By incinerating this depot, Ukraine didn't just burn millions of dollars of Russian oil, they effectively paralyzed the Russian tank battalions and armored columns across the eastern front. Without fuel, those tanks are just million-dollar metal coffins. Without fuel, the artillery units cannot reposition, leaving them totally vulnerable to counter-battery fire. What we are witnessing in the Donbass is a masterclass in modern warfare. Ukraine isn't just holding the line. They are reaching deep behind enemy lines to crush the strategic pillars that keep the Russian war machine moving. And as we are about to see, their reach is extending far, far beyond the borders of Ukraine, straight into the undeniable territory of Vladimir Putin. But the most terrifying reality for the Kremlin is not what is happening inside Ukraine. It is what is raining down from their own skies. We are witnessing the most ambitious, high-stakes cross-border operations since the very first day of this conflict. Kyiv has officially taken the gloves off, and they are striking deep into the absolute heart of the Russian war machine. Let me break down the sheer scale of what just happened with Ukraine's long-range strikes. We just witnessed the longest-range cruise missile attack to date. Ukrainian forces launched indigenous Flamingo cruise missiles and struck the Votkinsk factory. This facility is not just a random warehouse. It is located over 1,400 kilometers away from the Ukrainian border. This factory is the holy grail of the Russian military-industrial complex. It is the primary forge where they produce their most devastating weapons, including the Iskander-M short-range ballistic missiles, the Topol-M intercontinental ballistic missiles, and reportedly the highly classified Oreshnik systems. We all know about the Oreshnik. It is Putin's most prized, highly touted weapon. Hitting this facility is like striking the king on the geopolitical chessboard. Open source intelligence analysts have pointed out that this plant was considered so vital that massive trenches and defensive perimeters had been constructed all around it. But none of those defenses could stop the Ukrainian Flamingo missiles from finding their mark. From my analysis, this strike proves a critical point. Despite the entire Russian intelligence apparatus trying to hunt down Ukrainian weapons facilities, Ukraine is successfully hiding and massively scaling up its domestic military production. They are constantly upgrading these Flamingo missiles. They are actively reducing their radar signatures and perfecting their guidance systems to slip right through Russia's multi-layered air defense network. And with a warhead weighing over a ton, the devastating power of a direct hit is absolute. But the Votkinsk factory was not the only target feeling the wrath of this new long-range capability. The massive Grau ammunition depot near the village of Kotlebin in the Volgograd region was also pulverized. This was a complex, heavily guarded storage hub packed with Russian missiles, artillery shells, and high-grade explosives. The strike was so precise and powerful that it vaporized a shelter covering approximately 3,600 square meters on the outside and absolutely gutted the 1,200 square meters of hardened interior space. This campaign of deep strikes is not limited to just cruise missiles. A massive swarm of long-range kamikaze drones is systematically dismantling Russian air power on the ground. Take the recent strike in the Oriol region. Under the cover of darkness, Ukrainian forces targeted the Pugachovka airfield. The drone operators managed to hunt down and completely destroy an Mi-8 military transport helicopter and a highly advanced Ka-52 attack helicopter. By wiping out these multi-million-dollar assets before they even take off, Ukraine is crippling Russian air logistics and close air support right at the source. And then there is the infrastructure war. Ukraine is actively plunging critical Russian industrial zones into darkness. According to recent data, a massive drone strike targeted the Frunzenskaya electrical substation in the Belgorod region. The local panics were immediate. Residents reported a series of earth-shaking explosions, followed by a towering column of thick black smoke. Widespread power outages instantly crippled the surrounding settlements and paralyzed parts of Belgorod city itself. Russian air defense systems fired frantically into the night, but the swarm overwhelmed them. Meanwhile, high-resolution satellite imagery captured the aftermath of another brilliant strike, this time hitting a chemical plant way up in the Tver region. The target was a vital workshop next to a company that produces specialized plastic lubricants explicitly for the Russian Ministry of Defense. The entire workshop was gutted. This is a deliberate, methodical strangulation of the Russian supply chain. But the ultimate psychological blow, the operation that truly sent shockwaves through the Kremlin towers, was directed straight at the capital. Moscow, in a massive coordinated operation, Ukraine launched a staggering wave of approximately 100 unmanned aerial vehicles directly at the heart of Russia. The panic in the capital was immediate and severe. The covert security protocol was triggered across the city. Every single major airport, Vnukovo, Domodedovo, Sheremetyevo and Zhukovsky, was forced into a total shutdown. Flights were desperately diverted or canceled. The skies over Moscow were completely paralyzed. Local authorities scrambled to claim they shot down 24 drones, but the sheer volume of the swarm forced temporary restrictions on the entire airspace for hours. And this is not an isolated incident. This is an escalating pattern. Just earlier this year, we saw repeated multi-day drone swarms targeting the Moscow region, forcing the cancellation of hundreds of flights. Ukraine is sending a very loud, undeniable message. The capital is no longer a safe haven. Moscow's pristine bubble has been popped. When you pull back and look at the entire board, the trajectory of this conflict is undergoing a massive, violent shift. Just look at the reality facing the Russian high command today. A humiliating collapse resulting in the loss of 300 square kilometers in the vital southern land bridge, utter despair, and total paralysis for their troops trapped in the north. Their most heavily guarded ballistic missile factories are burning deep inside their own borders, and their capital city is forced to shut down its skies in terror. All of this data points to one terrifying truth for Moscow. The next move in this geopolitical chess match is going to be utterly devastating. The only question now is where and when Ukraine will deploy its final strategic reserves to deliver the knockout blow. The mental cycle of this war is rapidly accelerating, and the coming days are poised to be the most critical and potentially the most catastrophic for the Russian military. What do you think is going to happen next? Is this the tipping point that fractures the Russian military completely, or are we staring down the barrel of an unprecedented escalation? Drop your absolute unfiltered take in the comments right now. If this deep dive woke you up to the reality on the ground, smash that like button and make sure you subscribe with notifications turned all the way on, because in this rapidly changing geopolitical landscape, you cannot afford to fall behind. Stay sharp, and I will see you in the next one.